Hey everybody, we are back with a part 2 to our cold hardy citrus damage report. Last night we finally had the coldest weather that we've experienced out here, which I'll show you now. We saw as low as 10.1 degrees out here in the field. They were forecasting 11 degrees, so just a little bit below as we have seen before. It tends to be just a wee bit colder out here. But finally seeing almost single digits, and when you factor in the full sun and windy conditions here, this has been a really good test. And you know, even though I knew going into this that we could lose some varieties, I was actually excited to see such cold temperatures, because to me this is really helping us filter through and decide which of these are the most worth growing, not only for us, but for those of you who are in similar climates or looking for varieties that just have superior qualities for cold hardiness, and then from there we can select the better fruiting ones. But let's take you through. I think maybe we'll start with our seedling selections just real quick, give a little update on that, and then we can take you through the established varieties rows. As you can see, several are missing. Some plants we did take out because we are trying to make space for new ones, and a couple we took out because they were damaged beyond saving. But starting off here, we have our Tri 4N, our tetraploid Tri, which besides some leaf curling actually looks really good compared to a majority of the stuff out here. There's definitely a few standout varieties, and this is certainly one of them. I'm really crossing my fingers that at the least I think it'll make a great ornamental, but hoping the fruit are halfway decent. I'm sure they'll just be similar to normal Tri, which isn't too bad, but I would be really excited if this thing could push some colder climates, because Tri already can handle some really cold temperatures, and the tetraploid version is showing to be no different. I don't think we're going to see the kind of cold that will really differentiate the two of these here, but we know it's at least as hardy. And actually, interestingly enough, it's holding onto its leaves, whereas its normal counterpart has not. So that's pretty interesting. And it's also one of those varieties, which we'll note on a bunch of these, it's one of those that shows no signs of windburn or sunburn, which you'll see on some of these. The side that's facing the sun and facing the wind will be a little more discolored and show a little bit more damage, which is very telling for some of these varieties in terms of their hardiness. As for our Tri here, it also looks actually really good. It's still held onto a couple of leaves, but pretty minimal damage in terms of sunburn or windburn, and absolutely no tip burn either. So it's showing, at least in our climate, to be almost equally hardy to the other Tri selections, despite being more unifoliate and bifoliate. This one I have more hope for in terms of fruit quality. And right next to it, kind of proving the hardiness of these Taiwanica selections, we have Lamandarin, which has actually held up really well for having no trifoliate DNA in it. Just at the very top, we're starting to notice a little bit of damage and some wrinkling, but besides that, the plant as a whole is holding up really good, and I'm not noticing too much discoloration on the trunk. Maybe a little bit at the base, but nothing critical. If we don't see colder than this, I think Lamandarin will bounce back great. And this is probably a variety I'm going to propagate a lot more of, because I was really happy with the hardiness. So I'm really glad that Virginia Fruit Grower selected this one. We did have some Dimicelli out here. I actually took them out, even though one of them actually only had probably similar damage to the Ventura Lamandarin here. The other one had some pretty significant damage to the trunk, pretty much enough to kill the plant, whereas one of them, again, was mostly undamaged. So I actually wanted to preserve it because I don't have much material of that variety, and it's a very rare variety. So I took one of them, potted it up, and put it in the greenhouse. I may eventually put one out here again when I get a thicker specimen. I do think they'll hold up to the cold better as they get thicker, but I noticed kind of variable hardiness once we got into the teens. I think once we were seeing those 15-degree days and getting all this sun and wind, Dimicelli didn't hold up as great, but I mean, in the warm season, it's such a vigorous grower, so I didn't want to lose that one. We also have our little leaf Sacaton with its short internodes and dwarf stature. It is looking pretty much unfazed by the cold. It dropped its leaves, but besides that, little leaf Sacaton is appearing very hardy, despite it did shoot out some growth right before we started getting some frost. So not sure about its dormancy, but so far no splitting, no real discoloration. It's looking really good. Improved Sacaton as well actually really shocked me because not only has it discolored less, but even the tip where it has this really tender growth that never hardened off, it's still not really dying back much. It has a little bit there, but all this stuff above that node there is tender, and it's been going through 10 degrees unfazed. I mean, that is pretty amazing for a Sacaton that actually has a much different leaf structure. And again, this is another more unifoliate and bifoliate selection, which you can tell we're kind of making in hopes that some of these have better fruit quality. Now, naturally, the star of our seedling selection show here, Trifoliate US #1 has not ceased to amaze me. And so far, I thought #2 was actually going to be hardier, but so far, I am wrong, and I actually may make a video on this, but we could touch on it lightly. The fact that trifoliate leaves and cold hardiness are not inseparable. A plant can have unifoliate or bifoliate leaves and be just as, if not more, cold hardy than a plant with fully trifoliate leaves and a plant that strongly resembles the trifoliate orange. Now, Trifoliate US #1 even has unifoliate leaves, as well as a fair amount of bifoliate leaves, but that's mostly what it is. It doesn't have nearly the amount of trifoliate leaves, and if you look all along this plant, if we get that to focus there, it has not discolored or burned or cracked or anything. It just amazes me how hardy this plant is, taking 10 degrees out here with no real damage at all, despite looking actually a lot like 10-degree tangerine. But I can confirm, and we'll get to it over here eventually, but you can see our 10-degree tangerine has not held up nearly as well as our Trifoliate US, which is an offspring of the Clem US 2-2 or 10-degree tangerine. So it's hardier than its parent while still embracing a lot of the characteristics that we want. I think this plant's going to be a winner, and I can't wait to see it fruit. Now, #2 here, I mentioned I actually think it's less hardy than I originally thought. You can see it's still holding up really well. It's starting to wrinkle a little at the top, but I finally noticed as we come down here, and you guys can see that we're noticing some pretty serious discoloration and sunburn at the bottom here on the thick parts of the trunk. And interestingly, this is where I've been noticing the damage on a lot of these plants, is I've been seeing it towards the base, and this is thicker material, so I'm not sure the exact reason behind that, but that was the same area where Pseudo Yuzu, our Sacaton strain that pretty much died right away with our Karaji, it showed that same damage, as well as the Dimicelli, one of the two seedlings that we had grafted there. So that seems to be a common area, but I'm actually surprised by this one, and I don't know if it would be hardier in a location with less sun, but in these field conditions, it's proving less hardy than #1, despite looking more like a trifoliate orange. So that one really threw me for a loop there. And lastly, in this row that we have left, we have our improved Swingle, which improved Swingle is looking just as good as always. Similarly, very impressive, just like improved Sacaton and Trifoliate US #1. It's probably one of our best hybrid performers out here. It just looks great, considering it's also a more unifoliate strain, so high hopes for that one as well. And actually, before we leave too, I will note, I'm curious to see the growth rate on this one this year. It did have 2 liters, so we will find out this year, trained in a single liter, how fast it grows, but I'm not sure if this is less vigorous than normal Swingle. Just taking a look at things, it's got me thinking. But alright, we'll go through the rows here of the established citrus varieties. We could start with, let's do the right side. These are our Thomasville citrange plants, and they're still holding up after 10 degrees and full sun and full wind, but they don't look nearly as pretty as they used to. You could see some damage there. We got that white speckling and discoloration, white speckling there. I have a theory, and it goes for a lot of these plants, no matter how hardy they were, some of this growth just wasn't mature enough to take the cold once winter finally came around. Some of these plants just got growing a little bit too late, so a little tip for those of you really zone pushing and really trying to get these plants to grow in a cooler zone, maybe let your plants mature a little bit before you put them out. I put these out in their first year. I was being very harsh about it, but some of these plants definitely would have benefited from getting thicker, more established trunks, because some of them can thicken up really fast, like Trifoliate, but Thomasville is much more slender and takes a bit more time. So I'm sure if Thomasville was more mature, it would be taking the cold even better right now. But this is a first year graft growth, and on top of that, it grew pretty late in the year because it just wouldn't stop trying to bloom on me. But right after, we saved a couple Trifoliate, which the plants that we do have look pretty good overall. They've discolored a little bit, but not too bad. I did end up retiring 2 of them because they had bark splitting. So a couple of them were growing too late and did not go fully dormant. And I had to bring them into the greenhouse to kind of rehab them. So we're going to cut them back and rejuvenate them, and I could save them that way, which in some cases you get lucky. But I will note in other cases, if the trunk splits with the scion, so the rootstock and scion are both splitting, your chances of recovery are a little bit lower. But after this, we have our Papeda and Papeda hybrid, starting with the Ichang Papeda, which looks pretty much unfazed. I mean, it has been a champion out here. So it's really true with some of the stuff you read online about these varieties. Not all of it, but the Ichang Papeda is definitely one of the hardiest evergreen citrus and one of the hardiest citrus in general, excluding the Trifoliate orange. But Yuzu over here has impressed me heavily. Honestly, 10-degree tangerine too, but it's showing more damage by this point. Yuzu still isn't showing any damage at all, and it's barely showing any discoloration for me. It's starting to look a little paler green on one side, but honestly, it looks really, really good for a pure citrus. So very, very happy with Yuzu, and I am going to be trying to select more Yuzu seedlings and getting more Yuzu strains out here to test. But 10-degree tangerine, it's still alive after 10 degrees, so it lives up to the name. And again, being a younger plant, it didn't take the cold as well as it could have, but we still have green growth, green branches that are looking great. A little bit of bubbling and damage on some of these. You could see some discoloration on the trunk there. But otherwise, not too bad. I think it's actually holding up better than the Ichang lemon here, which is finally showing some more significant damage after 10 degrees. It's starting to wrinkle down this main stem, which was one of those ones where I wasn't sure if it was fully hardened off, but it doesn't look too bad as you get lower onto this thicker stuff. A little discolored, but I think our Ichang lemon will recover. So we can at least say Yuzu, 10-degree tangerine, and Ichang lemon all seem to be reliably hardy down to 10 degrees once they are adequately thickened and established. So figure second, third year plants would probably do better than the ones I have out here. Now, we did leave our poor little Shaquasha. I've been pruning back the growth as it's been dying back. I don't know if this will be the final nail in the coffin, but it's looking pretty close because, let's see if we scratch there. We do still have a little bit of green, so not all hope is lost, but you can see some pretty heavy discoloration on these thicker branches that are left. It didn't really get a chance to put on thicker growth, but at the same time, it also doesn't seem very cold resistant compared to some of our other stuff. I will say it did still seem better than the Karaji, and even in our greenhouse, where we have still been getting cold temperatures, Chihuahua mandarins seem to be hardier than a lot of the others, so it is standing out amongst its group, but out here it may just be too cold. So we got some empty holes here where we're moving some plants around, but past this we have our many Prague Chimera plants. I can't wait to get these bigger next year, but they are holding up really good. Overall, not much damage on these, but I will show you where we are seeing some damage. Some plants, as you can tell, grew out, again, a little bit too late. So some of those younger shoots are showing damage and bubbling, as well as some discoloration, which is more significant on some of these branches here, which you could see that brownish color there. Otherwise, this is a bigger plant, so it will recover, but we might lose a bit more material than I really wanted to on these. I was trying to preserve as much as I can because this variety is so rare, but we may just have to take some losses. So you could see more of that damage here. It's pretty consistent across the board. Some of these just started growing a bit too late. So we'll take you all the way down to the Conestogas here. Conestoga 058 and 067, both multi-grafted on these plants. So both varieties are in each of these, but this is a citrange rootstock. Conestoga 058 has held up remarkably well. Barely any discoloration. I mean, actually, I am noticing, okay, there is a little bit of a difference in the green, but it's not nearly as bad as some of those other varieties. But that seems to be consistent for both 067 and 058. However, it's showing no other damage whatsoever. So this is a variety that seems, again, hardy down to 10 degrees and maybe lower. This has survived negative 11 degrees, but looking back on those photo records, I did see that it did die down to the ground once it reached those temperatures. So it's root hardy for sure, but as for the top, I'm not exactly sure. Somewhere in the single digits, and I think that goes for both of these. Those 067 is probably the hardier of the two, and also slightly more trifoliate in appearance. Now here we have our citramons. One of them, and I'm beating myself up over this, but it's just a lesson learned. One of them I moved from the greenhouse because I was actually so surprised that this one here that I left out the whole time was doing so well and taking the cold. I didn't want to take up more valuable greenhouse space, so I put this one back outside because I figured it was pretty dormant anyway. Well, that was a mistake. Clearly, these plants still acclimate outdoors. It doesn't matter if they went dormant in the greenhouse or not. There's still some other processes that take place because this plant was shocked coming out here and it got burned pretty bad all along this side. Whereas you could see the reverse side looks excellent. So it's really just that wind and sun that really hit it hard. So that's a mistake on my part, and that's something I need to take note for next year. But we have our many US 942s here. And I gotta say, I heard that these weren't as hardy for some people. But so far, from what I've observed, these actually seem like one of our hardiest varieties out here. I don't know if it's our climate or the age of these plants, but we do have some first-year grafts which were enormously vigorous. I mean, that is amazing for 1 year. And some of these plants are 2 years old, and they are taller than me. Wow, that one's probably 6.5 feet tall, and hopefully we'll get some fruit off of this next season, but I'm not noticing much discoloration, if any, on these plants. Maybe a slight bit, but nothing in the realm of sunburn or windburn, which is really, really good to see. So US 942 seems very hardy. Grafted on Trifoliate or not, it doesn't seem to matter because on its own roots, it seems hardy enough. Now we go past those. We do have some US 852, which kind of similar to the 942. These citrandrins just take the cold really well, and similarly, they also, neither of these really show really bad sunburn or windburn. So the citrandrins are definitely built to take it out here, which is good because we'll be capitalizing on that in the future, because I do want to select some more citrandrins and make some new crosses. But we have those all the way till the end here, and I actually switched places with our Swingle and our Benton citrange, which Benton citrange seems plenty hardy enough. Interestingly, and I don't know if it's because I might have rotated these plants or something when I planted them, but that one does show a bit more discoloration, but nothing too bad. I am noticing a difference with the types of discoloration, and we'll kind of get into that contrast. But a good example here, on this side, we have a pure Trifoliate orange, which we know is hardy even out here in these field conditions, but it turns kind of that yellowish color. It loses that chlorophyll in the winter. Well, some of them, even 5-star Citramello over there is doing it, and many others, some of them turn that pale yellow-green, and then others show that whitish tan, actual burns on them, or even brownish color. That's a worse sign for sure, whereas seeing that color and on the citrange here, that is less of a concern to me. Now in the back here, we did move our Swingles here. So we have our Swingle Citramello, and Swingle honestly looks really, really good. It's one of those that looks like completely unaffected. So Swingle is more than hardy down to 10 degrees, and we all know that. And I am going to be incorporating other strains of Swingle into these rows. So we're going to be adding Dingle and Iva Swingle Citramello too. So those are really exciting. I'm looking forward to having them in the rows. We put a couple Flying Dragon here because Flying Dragon produces a lot of zygotic seeds, so it's really good for breeding. So I wanted to have just a couple specimens, nothing fancy for, having a fruit that we want to use for culinary purposes, but for making new varieties, this one will be very useful. We have our 5-star Citramello here. Like I was saying, it's a little discolored, but that seems to be not a negative thing with these. They otherwise look really good. I removed some where they had some tender growth that got frostbit, but I ended up using them actually to graft our Iva and Dingle because I just had so many 5-stars, and I'm trying to think of what to do. I have so many US 942s as well where I might have to thin out some of these just to not add too many plants here, because ideally I want these whole rows filled with new hybrids, not just stuff that exists already. We can find stuff that exists already, but I want to create new ones that are superior to what we have here for reference. We do have some Dunstan Citramellos here, which you can see. This one's got some nice thick branches on it. And we have a few. This one's probably the smallest of the group here, this little graft here. And it has a little more discoloration. And actually, you could see some dieback on those thorns there. But otherwise, it seems like it may make it through. No biggie if it doesn't. We have some more copies here. But yeah, Dunstan's perfectly hardy, and that's already proven in our area. I think we have some Saccatons here. Oh, I switched them. So that's our Saccaton here. And I think that's the start of the Dunstan. So Saccaton, as you saw there, very thick and doing well. I removed maybe one of those. But Dunstan here, pretty much the same thing. The discoloration is a bit more prominent on Dunstan, but as long as they're sufficiently hardened off, they seem to be perfectly fine here. That one has a little funny shape to it. Our Bishop Citrandrin, kind of similar to US 852, being a seedling of it, but it is supposed to be less hardy, though that doesn't seem like a concern in our zone. I don't think we'll ever see the temperatures. I mean, fingers crossed, I don't think we'll see the temperatures that'll really push Bishop to its limit here. So it is perfectly suited for here, and I'm not noticing on any of these anything really significant. This one maybe has a little more yellowish hue to it, but nothing too concerning. And we got a nice tall one here too. Our Dragon Lime, another one of those that looks unscathed and unaffected in any way. Dragon Lime's supposed to be very, very hardy. I'm not sure if it's exact limit, but it seems like here this is probably a good choice for an ornamental because it is unaffected by the recent lows. US 812 here. I think some branches might show a little bit more wrinkling and discoloring, but honestly, for the most part, the whole plants look unaffected. I'm not seeing any crazy type of damage here. Maybe some of the smaller ones, you know, could have been a little more susceptible. It does have kind of lankier, like thinner growth on it, but besides that, it seems very hardy. Now our X639 citrandrons, which grew really tall here, these seem to have held up really well. I'm even noticing, I mean, on the tip here we see maybe just a little bit of damage, but on some of these other ones, there is none at all. So it kind of just depends, I guess, how tender they were. I know this one had a little bit of growth that completely froze off, but it was holding up for a bit in the 20s and I think even the high teens. But these plants look pretty good. Minor discoloration, but nothing else in terms of damage. And they reached a nice thick caliper. That's definitely something more like what we'd want to see for first year plants if they're going out here. These are our Poncerus Plus, so our improved trifoliate orange plants, and look at those thorns, wow. These are holding up just as well as you'd expect from a trifoliate orange. Nothing too crazy to be expected there. Most of the trifoliates we put here, I expect they should at least be hardy to our zone, if not many zones below us too. And we have some Morton citrange. These held up really well, even being smaller plants that were started later. I think I actually only had, it was either one or two of these that had a little more tender growth and a little more splitting, so kind of similar to like what I did with the Trifiola and I think one or two of the others. I cut them back and rejuvenated them so they can regrow healthy and not split, and luckily the trunks were not split, which helped out a lot. But yeah, these look really good overall. Not too bad. So a little bit past this, I moved our C35 or Conestoga 050. Kind of has those two different identifiers there, but for all intents and purposes, this is probably a C35 citrange. Kind of one of those ones that gives you a little tingly feeling in your mouth. I really remember it for that. But it's a beautiful ornamental. The fruit look amazing on it, and so far it seems perfectly hardy out here. I've heard that this one might be less hardy than some of the other citranges, but at least down to 10 degrees I haven't noticed a difference compared to any of the others. Now our Tri, this is one that is certainly very hardy for its caliper, because these are small plants that were started late. And even then, I mean, we're noticing maybe some slight discoloration down there, but for the most part, Tri is very hardy. Even at these top portions that were a little more tender, they seem to be doing okay, although discolored more. They don't look bad, and this one has defoliated completely finally. It took a little while for it to get there. It still has like two hanging on, but yeah, it looks totally fine as well. And last but not least here, we have our Rusk citrange. And these are doing pretty good, although you can see that one. This is a good example. This was a tender shoot that came up here. You can see that wrinkling and that damage down there. I mean, this, I could just bend that and break it off. I'm probably just going to prune that. There's no point in really trying to save that there. But these thicker branches that matured are holding up just fine. And actually, this was the plant that I originally fell on and broke, and it resprouted. So I'm glad that these limbs hardened off, but this is probably just another late one that kind of reacted to that. But as you guys can see, overall, I mean, not too much has changed since our last cold hardy assessment here, or last damage assessment. And I think last time was closer to 17 degrees or 16 degrees. So now we're looking at 10 degrees. And of course, while a couple of these like Dimicelli, Pseudouyuzu, Karaji, and Shakwasha were not suitable out here, for the most part, everything else is. I would say From what I've seen, the only Trifoliate hybrids that may be a bit more marginal out here, and I have heard this too, Trifoliate and Morton. And granted, I'll give them this, they were started later than some of the others, but those two varieties were some of the only Trifoliate hybrids I had out here that did experience bark splitting. Not to a very significant degree, much less than the Karaji that ended up dying on us, but it is something to note that they were slightly more susceptible because I had to take out a couple plants compared to some of the others that were also started late, like Tri, which didn't experience any splitting. So there is still a difference amongst these. We may not notice that difference here, but some of you in colder zones might have to be careful if you're interested in growing those varieties. But Trifoliate is a late ripener anyway, so I'm still not quite sure about its suitability for colder zones until we try its fruit before the winter. But anyway, we came out with a lot of information, and I'm not sure if we'll see colder. Maybe we will. That would be a little exciting to test these further, but again, one of those things that I'm really happy to see, one, is our seedling selections are doing fantastic, and two, I'm really happy that Yuzu is actually doing so well out here, and even Clemuse 2-2, aka 10 Degree Tangerine, and I-Chang Lemon still putting up a fight at these temperatures. It's really amazing to see, considering we are out in an open field. And I know I did that video recently talking about protecting your citrus from the full sun and the full wind, and I keep emphasizing this because it really makes a huge difference. I mean, this is a lot tougher on these plants than you'd ever want to be ideally, and if you could plant these in a better situation, please do. We are only doing this to really figure out what the very strongest are out here. But the fact that Yuzu is holding its ground against some of these extremely hardy plants here, at least down to 10 degrees, I mean, that's really impressive. So I'm glad to see that. And I'm glad to see actually that we are having some drop out of the race here, because that's also giving us some valuable information on the limits of these varieties. So let me know how you guys are doing. I know everyone else is seeing some really cold temperatures now, so I'd be interested to hear if you've made some interesting observations too. So please share down below in the comment section. But otherwise, make sure you like and subscribe. It helps out a lot, and it's been great seeing you all on the channel here. So thank you for tuning in, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.